The escape pod cut through Earth's atmosphere like a dying star, leaving a trail of silver smoke in its wake. Inside, Lyra pressed her blue-tinted hands against the control panel, trying to steady the small craft as warning lights flashed all around her. Her heart beat faster as the ground rushed up to meet her, the dense forest below growing larger with each passing second. Emergency landing protocols engage, the pod's computer announced in a calm voice that seemed almost mocking given their situation. Lyra's silvery blood dripped from a cut on her forehead, the wound a painful reminder of her hasty escape from the mothership. The pod's sensors screamed warnings as the tree line approached. Lyra closed her large purple eyes and braced for impact. The crash came in stages. First, the scraping of metal against treetops, then the horrible grinding of the pod's outer shell being torn apart, and finally, the bone-jarring impact as they hit the ground. When Lyra opened her eyes again, moonlight streamed through a crack in the pod's hull. The forest around her was quiet except for the hissing of damaged systems and the soft patter of rain against metal. She tried to move, but pain shot through her leg. Looking down, she saw that a piece of the control panel had broken off and pinned her to the seat. Her universal translator flickered weakly on her wrist, damaged but still somewhat functional. The air quality sensors showed that the atmosphere was breathable, though the oxygen levels were higher than what she was used to. At least she wouldn't suffocate. Lyra's thoughts drifted back to the moments before her escape. She had been so sure, so certain that exposing the Council's war plans was the right thing to do. But she hadn't expected them to react with such fury, to declare her a traitor without even considering the evidence she had gathered. The escape pod's emergency beacon blinked slowly, its power failing. Lyra reached out with shaking hands and turned it off. She couldn't risk them finding her. The Council would rather see her dead than let her reveal the truth about their planned invasion of the peaceful systems in the Outer Rim. Night turned to dawn, and Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain in her leg grew worse, and she could feel the beginning of a fever. The medical supplies in the pod's emergency kit were basic, enough to keep her alive but not much more. She managed to inject herself with a broad-spectrum antibiotic, hoping it would help fight off any infection from her injuries. The forest around the crash site was unlike anything she had seen before. Through the crack in the hull, she watched strange birds with colorful feathers fly past, and small furry creatures scurry along tree branches. The plants were all wrong too, green instead of the purple she was used to, and so many different kinds growing together. As the sun climbed higher, Lyra's fever got worse. The pod's environmental controls were failing, and the temperature inside began to rise. She tried to reach the water packets stored in the emergency compartment, but the movement sent waves of pain through her injured leg. Warning: multiple systems failing, the pod's computer announced. Backup power at 20%. Estimated time to complete failure: 6 hours. Lyra let her head fall back against the seat. She had known when she made her choice that she might die, but she hadn't imagined it would end like this, alone on a primitive world, trapped in a broken pod. At least she had managed to save the data crystal containing proof of the Council's plans. It was still secured in her suit's hidden pocket, waiting for someone to find it and understand its importance. The sound of thunder rolled across the sky, and more rain began to fall. Lyra watched drops of water leak through the damaged hull, forming small puddles on the pod's floor. As her fever rose, she thought she could hear something moving in the forest outside. Something large. But that was impossible. According to the briefings she had read, this sector of space was supposed to be uninhabited by any advanced species. She was wrong. Jack Thompson's boots crunched over wet leaves as he followed the strange trail of broken trees. 20 years as a forest ranger had taught him to notice when something was wrong in his woods, and everything about this scene felt wrong. The damage wasn't from any storm he'd ever seen, and the weird silver marks on some of the branches made his skin tingle. He adjusted the medical kit on his shoulder, an old habit from his military days that he'd never shaken. Even on routine patrols, he carried enough supplies to handle any emergency. The morning fog hung low between the trees, and his breath made small clouds in the cold air. The trail led him to a small clearing that hadn't been there yesterday. Jack's hand tightened on his walking stick as he took in the scene. A metal object about the size of a small card lay half buried in the earth, its silver surface dulled with scorch marks. Strange symbols glowed weakly along its side, and a thin trail of smoke rose from what looked like engines. "Well," he whispered to himself, "this is definitely not a weather balloon." Jack approached carefully, his old combat training taking over. The object, clearly some kind of spacecraft, had torn a long gash in the forest floor. As he got closer, he noticed a crack in its hull, wide enough to see inside. He pulled out his flashlight and peered through the opening. The beam of light fell on something that made his heart skip a beat. A figure was slumped in what appeared to be a pilot's seat, obviously injured. The figure was humanoid, but definitely not human. Its skin had a blue tint, and its features were more delicate than any person he had ever seen. A quiet moan came from inside the craft. The alien was alive. Jack's medical training kicked in immediately. He treated wounded soldiers in worse conditions than this. The crack was wide enough for him to squeeze through, though he had to be careful of the sharp edges. Inside, the air was hot and smelled like ozone. The alien's eyes fluttered open as his movement disturbed the craft. They were large and purple, filled with fear and pain. A silvery liquid, blood, he realized, had dried on the side of its face. "Easy there," Jack said in his calmest voice, the one he used with injured hikers. "I'm here to help." He held up his hands to show he was unarmed, hoping the gesture meant the same thing to aliens as it did to humans. The alien tried to move away from him, but was pinned by debris. A small device on its wrist crackled with static before producing broken words in English. Please. No hurt." "I'm not going to hurt you," Jack said slowly and clearly. He pointed to the red cross on his medical kit. "I'm a healer. A doctor." He mimed, checking a pulse and bandaging a wound. The alien watched him with those strange purple eyes, its chest rising and falling rapidly. Jack could tell it was running a fever. The skin around its temples had a darker blue tinge that reminded him of how humans flushed when sick. He opened his medical kit and took out a bottle of water. Slowly, telegraphing his movements, he held it out. The alien hesitated, then reached for it with shaking hands. The relief on its face as it drank was completely human. "My name's Jack," he said, pointing to himself. He began unpacking his medical supplies, laying them out carefully where the alien could see them. "I'm going to get you out of here." The alien touched the device on its wrist again. "Lyra." She said. "Name, Lyra." Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward, unconscious. Jack checked her pulse, faster than a human's but steady. "Okay, Lyra," he said, pulling on medical gloves. "Let's see what we can do about that leg." Outside, the forest grew quiet as the local wildlife sensed something unusual was happening. The morning fog began to lift, revealing a clear autumn sky. Neither human nor alien noticed the small red light that had begun blinking on the pod's damaged control panel. 3 days after finding the crash site, Jack returned to the pod carrying a backpack full of supplies. He'd managed to free Lyra's leg and stabilize her condition, but moving her was still too risky. The makeshift camp he built around the pod wasn't much, but it kept the rain off and provided some cover from prying eyes. Lyra was awake when he arrived, sitting up against the pod's wall. Her universal translator had improved slightly after Jack had helped her repair its power source using parts from his old radio. She watched him approach, no longer showing fear, but still cautious. "Good morning," Jack said, keeping his voice gentle. He'd learned that loud noises made her flinch. "How's the leg today?" The translator crackled. "Better. Pain. Less." She pointed to the bandages he'd applied. "Your medicine. Works different, but helps." Jack unpacked fresh medical supplies and some food. He'd discovered that while Lyra couldn't eat most human food, she could safely consume certain fruits and pure water. Today he brought some apples and berries. Why help? Lyra asked suddenly, her purple eyes fixed on his face. Your people? Don't know mine. Could be dangerous. Jack smiled as he checked her bandages. Been a medic too long to ignore someone who needs help, human or not. Besides, he added, dangerous people usually don't crash land alone in escape pods. The translator hummed as it processed his words. Lyra was quiet for a moment, then reached into a hidden pocket in her suit. She pulled out a small crystal that glowed with a soft blue light. Need to show you why I run, she said. She held the crystal out to him with trembling hands. Truth. Important. Jack took the crystal carefully. As soon as he touched it, a hologram appeared above it, showing strange alien text and what looked like military plans. Lyra touched her translator and spoke slowly, making sure each word came through clearly. My people, the Starborn, our leaders plan war. Many peaceful worlds will die. Her voice shook. I found proof. Try to stop them. They called me traitor. Snow began to fall outside the pod, the first of the season. Jack watched the delicate flakes while he absorbed what Lyra had told him. He'd seen enough war to know its cost, and enough cover-ups to recognize the courage it took to stand against them. Winter's coming, he said finally. This pod won't be safe much longer. I have a cabin, about 2 miles from here, hidden in the woods, no other houses for miles. He met her gaze. You'd be safer there. Lyra's hand went to her throat, where he knew her people wore family markings. Why trust me so much? Jack started repacking his medical kit. Because you trusted me first. Showed me this. He held up the crystal, when you could have kept hiding the truth. That means something. The translator was silent for a long moment as Lyra thought. Outside, the snow was falling harder. Finally, she nodded. When can we go? Tomorrow morning, Jack said. I'll bring a stretcher. It won't be comfortable, but we'll take it slow. He stood up and brushed off his pants. Get some rest. It's going to be a long day. As he turned to leave, Lyra's translator sparked once more. Jack. He looked back. Thank you. For believing. He nodded, throat tight with emotion. Get some sleep, Lyra. I'll be back at dawn. Walking back through the snowy forest, Jack thought about what he was risking. His job, maybe even his freedom if the wrong people found out. But looking at the crystal in his pocket, seeing the trust in Lyra's eyes, he knew he was doing the right thing. Sometimes, he thought, that had to be enough. The basement of Jack's cabin turned out to be perfect for hiding an alien refugee. It was warm, dry, and most importantly, invisible from the outside. Jack spent 2 days converting it into a living space for Lyra, adding a bed, some basic furniture, and rigging up extra heaters to match the warmer temperature her species needed. Lyra's leg was healing faster than any human injury he'd ever seen. By the end of their first week in the cabin, she could walk short distances, though she still needed help with stairs. Her universal translator worked much better now that Jack had connected it to his spare laptop's power source. Your world is so different, Lyra said one evening as they sat in the basement. She was examining a book about Earth's wildlife that Jack had brought her. All this. Life. So many kinds growing together. On my world, everything is planned. Controlled. Jack watched as she carefully turned the pages with her blue-tinted fingers. Must be quite a change, he said, adjusting the heater. You seem to be adapting well, though. Because of you, she replied, looking up from the book. You make it easier to understand. She paused, choosing her words carefully through the translator. My people think humans are primitive. They are wrong. You have something we lost. Kindness without purpose. Outside, snow fell steadily, covering the forest in white. Jack had told the Forest Service he was taking personal leave to care for a sick relative. It wasn't entirely a lie. After 2 weeks, he'd started to think of Lyra as family. They developed a routine. During the day, Jack would do his regular patrols to avoid suspicion, while Lyra studied Earth's languages and culture through his old books and laptop. In the evenings, they would talk, sharing stories about their worlds. Jack taught her about Earth's history and customs, while Lyra told him about the stars and the world she had seen. But it wasn't all peaceful. Sometimes, late at night, Jack would find Lyra staring at the crystal she had brought, its blue light illuminating her worried face. The plans she had discovered showed her people were preparing for war on a scale Earth had never seen. "They will come looking," she said one night, her voice tight with fear. "The Council does not forget traitors." Jack checked the new security system he had installed around the cabin. "Let them come. This is my forest. I know every tree, every hill. They'd have to find us first." Lyra touched the bandage on her healing leg. "You don't understand. Their technology. They can track the smallest energy signature. The crystal, my translator, even my own body, all give off energy they can detect. Then we'll figure something out," Jack said firmly. "I didn't bring you all this way to give up now." That night, as a blizzard raged outside, they sat together planning. Jack drew maps of the surrounding forest, marking caves and hidden valleys where they could go if needed. Lyra worked on modifying her translator to mask its energy signature, using skills she'd learned working in her people's science division. As they worked, something changed between them. They were no longer just rescuer and refugee. They had become partners, each bringing their own strengths to face what was coming. "Jack," Lyra said as morning approached, "there's something else you should know." She hesitated, then continued. "The crystal, it doesn't just contain their war plans. It has the location of others like me, people who want to stop the Council, if we could reach them." Jack nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. This wasn't just about keeping one person safe anymore. It was about preventing a war that could destroy countless lives. "Then we'd better make sure we're ready," he said, spreading out another map. "Because something tells me our quiet winter is about to get interesting." The warning came on a cold winter morning. Lyra's translator started making a strange humming sound, and the crystal in Jack's desk drawer began pulsing with an urgent red light instead of its usual calm blue. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice shaking as she checked readings on her modified translator. "A scout ship just entered Earth's orbit. They're looking for me." Jack immediately began gathering their emergency supplies. Over the past month, they had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it still made his heart race. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe less," Lyra said, her fingers dancing over the translator's interface. "They'll start with orbital scans, looking for energy signatures that match starborn technology." She looked up at him, her purple eyes wide with worry. "Jack, you should leave. What's coming? It's not your fight." Jack checked the ammunition in his old service pistol before tucking it into his belt. "Pretty sure it became my fight when I found you in that pod." He smiled grimly. "Besides, I've got some friends who might be interested in uninvited guests." He pulled out his emergency phone, the one he kept from his military days. It took 3 calls before someone answered. "Tom, it's Jack Thompson. Remember that favor you owe me from Damascus? I'm calling it in." He paused, listening. "Yeah, it's exactly that kind of situation. I need eyes in the sky and a secure channel. And Tom, bring the special equipment, the really special equipment." While Jack made his calls, Lyra worked frantically to mask their location. She had modified the basement's heaters to create a field that would hide her biological signature, but the crystal was harder to conceal. Its data was too important to destroy. It contained not just the war plans, but coordinates for resistance cells across 3 galaxies. "I've got good news and bad news," Jack said, putting down the phone. "Good news is we've got help coming. Bad news is they won't be here for 6 hours." Lyra's translator crackled as she checked another reading. "We don't have 6 hours. Look." She projected a hologram showing Earth's orbit. A small red dot was moving in a search pattern. They're using a new scanning frequency, one I can't block. Jack watched the dot's methodical movement. Can they pinpoint us exactly? No, Lyra said, but they can narrow it down to about 10 square miles. Once they do, she didn't need to finish. They both knew what would happen. Then we change the game, Jack said, pulling out his forest maps. We've got something they don't, home field advantage. Those ships may be advanced, but they've never dealt with Earth's magnetic fields, our atmosphere, or our technology. A plan began to form. Jack's military contacts would bring equipment designed to interfere with advanced technology, originally created to defend against Earth's enemies, but equally effective against alien craft. They would set up a perimeter of signal jammers, using the forest's natural iron deposits to amplify their effect. There's something else, Lyra said quietly. She pulled up another hologram, showing a familiar pattern of stars. Before my translator started warning us, it picked up a coded transmission. There are others, Jack. Other Starborn who followed my example, who stole ships and escaped. They're watching, waiting to see if one person can successfully stand against the Council. Jack checked his watch. 5 hours until help arrived. He looked at Lyra, seeing not the injured alien he'd found in the woods, but a partner he'd trust with his life. Then let's give them something worth watching. Outside, snow began falling again, covering their tracks around the cabin. Above the clouds, unseen in the gray winter sky, the scout ship continued its search pattern. The hunt had begun. The scout ship broke through the clouds at sunset, its silver hull reflecting the orange sky. Jack and Lyra watched from their hidden position in an old hunting blind, surrounded by equipment Tom and his team had brought. The alien vessel was smaller than Jack had expected, about the size of a helicopter, but its weapons could level half the forest. They're trying to trigger a response from my translator, Lyra whispered, watching readings on a modified Earth tablet. They know I'm somewhere in this area. Her hands moved quickly over the device Tom had given her, redirecting power to their countermeasures. Jack adjusted the targeting system on their main defense unit, a prototype electromagnetic pulse generator disguised as a weather research station. Let them get a little closer, he said quietly. We need them inside the perimeter. The ship moved slowly through the valley, its sensors sweeping back and forth. Trees swayed in the energy wake of its engines. In the distance, Tom and his team waited at their own positions, ready to activate the signal jammers they'd planted throughout the forest. Jack, Lyra said suddenly, there's something wrong. She showed him the tablet. That's not a normal scout ship pattern. They're not just searching. Her eyes widened. Move. They rolled out of the blind seconds before a beam of energy cut through it. The ship had dropped its stealth field, revealing weapons pointed directly at their former position. Through the translator came a cold voice speaking Lyra's language. Traitor, it said, surrender the crystal and your death will be quick. Jack grabbed their backup equipment bag, while Lyra activated their first countermeasure. The jammers around the forest hummed to life, creating a field of interference. The ship's weapons flickered, its systems fighting against the unfamiliar technology. You hide behind primitive weapons, the voice said. How far you have fallen to trust these animals. Lyra stood up, facing the ship. Her translator projected her voice clearly through the winter air. These animals showed more honor than the Council ever did. They help without demanding, protect without threatening, trust without conditions. The ship's weapons powered up again, adjusting to their interference. Jack pressed a button on his radio, signaling Tom's team. Around the valley, more jammers activated, their frequencies coordinated to match Lyra's calculations. Last warning, the voice said. The crystal, or we burn this forest and everyone in it. Jack stepped up beside Lyra, holding the EMP controller. You're assuming we're trying to hide, he said, smiling grimly. We're not. We're drawing you in. Lyra pulled out the crystal and held it up. Its blue light pulsed brightly, but not from fear. It was transmitting. Every moment of this confrontation was being recorded and broadcast on frequencies the Resistance could access. "You're right about one thing," Lyra said to the ship. "I did trust humans. I trusted them to help me show everyone watching right now exactly who you are, what the mighty Starborn have become. Bullies who threatened to burn forests to hide their own crimes." The ship's weapons fired, but they were ready. The EMP burst hit it from all sides, synchronized with the jammers. Lyra's knowledge of Starborn technology combined with Earth's raw power created something their enemies had never faced. The scout ship's systems failed. It dropped heavily to the ground, its crew trapped inside by their own dead technology. In orbit, watching through hidden relays, dozens of resistance cells saw a single Starborn and a single human stand their ground. "Signal's gone out," Jack said, checking the equipment. Everyone who needed to see this saw it. Lyra looked at the fallen ship, then at the human beside her. "Think it will make a difference?" "You already have," he replied. "Now let's go say hello to our visitors. I think they have some explaining to do." 3 months after the confrontation in the snowy forest, Jack stood beside Lyra in a very different setting. The United Nations Assembly Hall stretched out before them, filled with representatives from every Earth nation. On screens above, ships from the Starborn Resistance Fleet hung in orbit, their presence both a protection and a promise. "The translators are ready," Lyra said, touching the new device at her throat. A gift from her people, the ones who had watched her stand against the Council and decided to do the same. "Are you nervous?" Jack adjusted his formal military uniform, worn today at the request of Earth's diplomatic team. "About telling the whole world that aliens exist, or about telling them we're about to join an interstellar revolution?" "Both," Lyra smiled, her purple eyes bright with anticipation. The last few months had changed her. She stood taller now, confident in her role as bridge between two worlds. The chamber fell silent as they approached the podium. Behind them, the crystal's contents played on massive screens, proof of the Council's wars, their hidden atrocities, and their plans for more conquest. But also proof of hope. Recordings of humans and Starborn working together, protecting each other, fighting side by side. "People of Earth," Lyra began, her translator conveying her words in every human language simultaneously. 3 months ago, I was a fugitive, wounded and alone. I thought I had lost everything by standing against corruption in my own government." She looked at Jack. "Instead, I found something greater, proof that different species can not only coexist, but make each other better." Jack stepped forward to join her. "What happened in our forest wasn't just about protecting one person. It was about standing up for what's right, no matter who makes the wrong." He gestured to the screens. "The Starborn Council thought humans were primitive, that we could never challenge their technology. They forgot that advancement isn't just about machines. It's about heart." The assembly hall erupted in discussion as more ships appeared on the screens, vessels stolen by resistance fighters, now arriving to join the fleet above Earth. Each one carried Starborn who had seen Lyra's broadcast and chosen to act. "We're not asking Earth to fight our war," Lyra continued. "We're offering a partnership. The Council fears this most of all, worlds working together, sharing knowledge, growing stronger through cooperation instead of conquest." The next hour was filled with questions, concerns, and eventually, decisions. Earth would grant asylum to Starborn resistance members. In return, they would share technology to help protect the planet and heal environmental damage. It wasn't just a military alliance. It was a chance to build something new. Later, as they walked through the UN gardens, Jack and Lyra paused to watch the sunset. The ships above were visible now, glinting like new stars in the evening sky. "Remember when you asked me why I helped you?" Jack said, looking up at the fleet. "Back when I first found you in that pod." Lyra nodded. "You said you'd been a medic too long to ignore someone who needs help." "That was true," he said, "but it wasn't the whole truth. I helped because it was right, and I stayed because I saw in you what I hoped existed out there. Proof that no matter where we come from, we can choose to be better." Lyra touched the crystal, now housed in a secure case at her side. We have so much work ahead. The Council won't stop easily. Good thing they're not just facing you anymore. Jack smiled. They're facing all of us. Above them, more ships appeared, carrying more allies who had chosen to stand against tyranny. The evening star shone brightly, a reminder that sometimes the darkest nights bring the greatest light. The war wasn't over, but something more important had been won. Hope, carried on the wings of trust between two different peoples who had chosen to believe in each other.